Hello, everyone, and welcome to our live Q&A here. Thank you so much for being with me. I thought I would squeeze in one more live stream before the holidays. So here we are, and I cannot wait to see what questions you have for me. So how we're going to do this is a little bit different. We are going to take your questions from actually my website, and there will be a link for that in the chat, and Wolf will post that link. We already have a bunch coming in because we had the form open for maybe a half hour or so. And so that's how you're going to get your question answered tonight. And that just kind of makes it so it's easier for the mods to grab them and send them to me. And that's pretty much it. Let's dive in to see what you guys want to talk about tonight. So the first question is from Sheila Sampson. And Sheila, you asked, hello, lovely Gigi. Do you think we are undergoing an etherization of the blood as we traverse from this iteration of Earth to something somewhere new? So this is a really great question. The etherization of the blood is a lecture that I did a year ago that basically describes how our body changes and how our sort of form really actually dematerializes from matter through a process of transubstantiation that occurs based in the blood. And now this is an anthroposophical concept called the etherization of the blood. So for more information on that, you can check out that lecture series that Rudolf Steiner did that talks about that. It's actually pretty intense and in-depth. And so essentially, for a very long time, humanity was sort of in a materialization arc. We were in a period of involution where we were developing and really materializing on the planet with the planet into a physical form, right? This is what made in the image of means. It means that we have materialized over a very long period of time into the human form that we have in the direct image of God, in the direct image also of the cosmos, which is why you often see planets overlaid over body parts and things like this in esoteric literature. And then eventually, at the exact middle point of the planet, you begin what is called the spiritualization arc. Now, in modern spirituality, this is what people call, ascension and, moving into 5D. In the Christian mysteries, this is called the mystery of resurrection. And so this is part of that. It's part of the preparation of essentially glorifying our spiritual bodies or our etheric body into a resurrection body or into a body that no longer is bound to the material world. And in the Eastern tradition, this is how we essentially get off of the wheel of samsara, or out of the karma of reincarnation over and over again. And so in that way, the resurrection mysteries are the answer to karma in that way. And how we do that, part of that is through activating the heart center. And the heart center is really kind of like a furnace. It's the midpoint in the body for a reason. And how it operates in our entire system is kind of like a transponder, or like it sort of acts as the middle point between the higher and lower bodies, which is very significant because it integrates them. And how you do that is you hold the essence of Christ within your heart. Okay. And that actually moves through your system in such a way that it creates a process called the etherization of the blood, which over time, the more you do this, life after life, essentially your form will become less and less material. And so that is sort of the big mystery and secret behind the etherization of the blood, and sort of the human being directly, consciously creating a higher body for themselves. That's the mystery. Okay. So this is actually a member question. I'm not going to be saying the names of the members. I'm just going to say member. And you said, hi, Gigi. I'm curious to know how important our ancestral blood lineage is. to our spiritual journey. For example, we are supposed to heal things along. For example, are we supposed to heal things along our blood family lines within soul family connections, or both? Is our physical ancestry and soul journey related? I assume we have past lives as part of many different races and cultures, but I also feel a pull towards some of the ancient roots of the area of the world my family line comes from. Yeah, that's very natural to feel a deep interest in your ancestral roots, because part of your makeup is your physical body. You know, we have a physical body, and then we have an etheric body, and then we have an astral body, and even, you could say, even higher bodies sort of from there, or higher influences even coming in from there. And so that's how we understand our physical vehicle and our physical body, and a lot of our experience is actually at the ancestral level. And we do have something called blood memory. And I think this is what you mean by ancestral blood lineage, which is that every single person has within their blood a very specific memory of their ancestors and the wisdom of their ancestors. Now, the blood memory and the idea of ancestor worship and the preservation of the blood and extreme tribalism is really a hallmark of the prior epoch, or the Atlantean epoch. This idea of not being able to mix blood is very much a vestige of the Atlantean era of human development and consciousness. Because back into that period, if you were to mix blood, not even with like a different race or something, but someone that was outside of your tribe, then that would mean that you would not be able to access your ancestral memory, because we had not yet had the incarnation of Christ. We hadn't yet moved forward enough in our consciousness to be liberated from the sort of spiritual laws of the physical body. That only happens later in human evolution. And so in earlier periods, that's where you really find this obsession with blood. You find the weirdest parts of blood magic. And all of that in our era, in our epoch, is really a carryover or a holdover of certain practices and ideologies that were in the Atlantean epoch, because this day and age, your blood is not going to define who you are. Okay, your blood is not going to be the thing that defines, for example, your ability to be psychic, or your ability to be smart, or your ability to evolve spiritually. It's not about your blood. It's not about your race. It's not about these things that were so important in Atlantis. It's really about your ability to transform yourself with the Christ impulse. That's really, with that essence in our heart, that's really what defines us. And that's really what leads to our evolution and the planet's evolution. So, in other words, there is something within us that is called blood memory. And we do, when we incarnate into a family, when you incarnate into a lineage, you do carry the ancestral karma of your ancestors. Of course we do. And it's kind of a collective consciousness, but part of why you incarnated is also to face that, to confront that, and to shed yourself from that. So that's part of your journey. And when you are incarnating into your family, there is a direct reason why you have chosen that, because it's going to give you a certain shape, a certain life that your soul actually needs to evolve and understand. But the most important thing here is that you're not bound by your ancestral memory. You're not bound by whatever your ancestors did. That's ridiculous, right? You are your own person, kind of wearing like the robe of your ancestors, but you can actually do incredible work. And often the black sheep of the family is often the individual that is, strangely enough, they're usually the ones that are out there transforming all of their ancestral wounds for their family. And they're out here like the spiritual black sheep, but they're actually doing the most work to transcend the ancestral karma that exists within the family line. And so there absolutely is such a thing as ancestral I guess you could say, ancestral trauma or wounding. It doesn't define who you are. And this is obvious by some people can go into a certain family and be destroyed by some of the ancestral patterns in the family. They pick up on it and they can't overcome it. While other people, it doesn't seem to bother them as much, and it's easier to transform or whatever, because that's to do with the soul. Okay, so your physical ancestry and your soul journey is absolutely related. And I would say that it's not the most important thing in your journey at all. And just by focusing on normal spiritual development, you actually overcome a lot of that stuff without even meaning to. So it's important to keep that in mind as well. Okay. Gina, too. Hey, Gina. Thank you for being here tonight. And you said, "Hi, hey, Gigi. Just wanted to say that I really admire your work. I have been learning so much from you. I have a question about psychopaths. Do you think their behavior could be connected to their past lives?" Well, thank you very much for that, Gina. And I absolutely do. I think that every life that we live is a culmination of past lives, and a culmination of our soul's journey. And I think that there's actually some issues within society and within humanity that literally cannot be properly understood unless you look at the individual as an entire soul incarnating in many different lives. And I think psychopathy is one of those things. Psychopathy tends to develop when a soul is at essentially the very, very darkest level of existence, in a sense. And in our era, it really is an example of an individual that has developed their I or their ego, but they have not yet learned that becoming selfless and becoming in service to humanity is how the ego sort of becomes exalted. And so there is the development of the I, there's the development of the ego, but that is only serving the self. And what drives that actually is when a soul is in survival mode. And so when somebody becomes extremely damaged after intense trauma, that is when we see the psychopathy develop. That is what I have personally noticed. So psychopathy and the darker personality traits, that's what happens when a soul is damaged. And I don't mean that in a flippant way. I mean they're traumatized. And when you're traumatized, you basically go into a survival mode where you're just trying to get by, and you see the world as predatory because that's your soul's experience is of abuse. And so when you look around, you don't feel safe. And you look around and you see the world as being a predatory world. And so you become a predator in order to survive. And some souls will actually, I think probably every human being has had a period in their development where they're like this. And I think you have to come out of it. I don't think every life that every person has is rainbows and butterflies. And I think we go into darker incarnations, and our purpose is to kind of to come out of that. And how you come out of that is through love, is through unconditional love and through compassion. And when people say that over and over again, it tends to open their heart. It's very hard to do when there's a predator, but that's the energy that frees, that tends to inspire and free people from that. And so, yeah, psychopathy manifests in a soul that is essentially in survival mode. And they try to become the apex predator because they feel like they've been predated along, so much. That's my observation of it. Okay, next question is from Bree. I am still trying to understand the planetary spheres and phases and planetary epochs. When you talk of the Earth going through a moon phase, Saturn phase, etc., Is this just the Earth in different conditions, aka not humanity living on the moon? How do these planetary phases interact with the epochs? What phase are we in the post-Atlantean epoch? Okay, so lots of really good questions here. What Bree is talking about is cosmogenesis. So in mystery traditions, there's an entire discipline that is called cosmogenesis, which discusses the development of the planet and humanity over incredibly long periods of time. Now, this exists in the Eastern traditions very clearly, but also in the Western traditions. You can see this in Theosophy, Anthroposophy, Rosicrucianism, Esoteric Christianity. They all have this one spiritual truth, spiritual reality that's called cosmogenesis, which is basically the creation of the cosmos itself, and especially obviously focusing on the most important planet to us, which is the Earth. And one of the most important things to understand this is that everything happens in recapitulations. So you may see different phases like Saturn phase, Sun phase, Moon phase, Vulcan phase in a planetary chain or a planetary development. But all of those phases are really just recapitulations of one another. Okay. And it happens in sevens as well. So that's something to keep in mind. So essentially, when you look at the Saturn phase of the Earth, you're looking really at an alchemical creation of the Earth, because the different phases going from Saturn to Sun to Moon to the Earth is actually the process of alchemy, with Saturn being just pure warmth. It's the Earth materializing into this reality, and it's just the phase of pure warmth. And then it condenses further into the Sun phase, which is fire. Okay, so now you've got warmth and you've got air, and that is what we call and heat, and that's what's called the Sun phase. All right, and then that condenses again, and it's called the Moon phase, and then you get water. You get the element water, and don't forget that these are all really very early developments of the planet as it materializes basically in the 3D plane. So it's not good enough to just say higher dimension. We come from a higher dimension. We come from a higher plane. That's not good enough. That's not precise enough. You have to be able to explain the actual materialization of the Earth in this dimension. Okay, that is the kind of precision that we need if we want to be serious esoteric students. And this has been known for thousands of years and kept in different mystery schools, but often left out of the dogmatic traditions because it's often overwhelming for people who are just trying to live their daily life. But if you really want to understand esoterica, you have to understand these patterns, because they recapitulate even in our daily life, right? So then you get, from the lunar water phase, you get the materialization of the Earth as we know it in the material arc, or the material creation of it, which is where we begin, which is where humanity begins and what we know. But before we took this material earthly condition, there were 3 other phases of the Earth in a higher plane that were watery, airy and fiery, and just warmth. And that's Saturn, Sun, and Moon. Now, the planets are sort of like basically shells or markers or reminders of that phase. As the cosmos, when we look out at it, is not chaotic. The cosmos that we look out at, whether it be our solar system or the fixed stars or the zodiac, what we're looking at are different developments of our own self and of our planet in different planes or aspects of development. So this idea that like we're going to go out and like discover all these worlds physically is ridiculous. You know, we already know through the esoteric traditions that every star you see is another aspect of our own sun. Every planet that you see is another aspect of our sun. And that is reflected to us in the firmament, or in the fixed stars. Okay. So, and I'm speaking esoterically, the word firmament, not conspiratorially. Okay. So, when the Earth was in Saturn period, the mass of the Earth technically stretched and was as big as Saturn. And then it condenses, and the Earth was as big as the sun to the Earth. The orbit, if you look at the Earth and you look at the sun, that's how big the planet was. And then when you get to the moon development, the Earth was as big as the orbit of the moon. And so then when you get to the material development, the Earth development, which is matter, it is the size that it is now. And so Saturn is like a shell or a marker of an earlier period of our own developmental history, of human development and planetary development, a very early incubation period. This is why it's called Father Saturn or the old sun. It's the old development. And also when you see the Earth, now that we're on the Earth and in the 3D plane and we're material, every single one of the planetary epochs or the developmental phases of our Earth is recapitulating Saturn development, sun development, moon development, Earth development, which is where we see the incarnation of Christ. Then we move forward and we get Jupiter. And then we move forward, we get Venus and Vulcan. And there's deep, deep, deep mysteries around what planets are, why planets are where they are. And so it's not that it's not that humanity was living on the physical moon. The moon now stands as a representation of the lunar phase of humanity. The moon itself separated from the center of the Earth when the Earth was not yet solid. And the moon itself is actually a protector. It actually works as a protection, keeping out fallen forces that are outside of the proper organic life wave. So keeping out fallen angel forces, keeping out life beings that are outside the life wave because they're essentially evil. Okay, that is beyond the moon. And so this is also why you see allegedly tampering with the moon. It's not because the moon is fake. Okay, it's because, you know, in earlier epochs, the moon was tampered with in order to release the essences in the moon. And having this narrative that the moon is completely fake actually feeds the misunderstanding of our own existence and also what the moon is. So the moon is not where we lived. It represents and is a doorway to forces that are from old moon development of the Earth that were cast out so that we could basically not be bothered by them. And there's a period of earthly development where the moon will be reabsorbed, right, into the Earth, and the Earth will eventually become a sun or a star itself. So in Cosmogenesis in general, we see the complete and entire evolution of a planetary sphere from an astral body that's not even physical, condensing slowly into matter through the elemental process, through the elemental alchemy of that, right? And then you see it eventually, it flips, everything reverses, and you begin to ascend out of matter. And every planet on the ascension arc, so Jupiter, Venus, and Vulcan, those are all the higher transformed aspect of moon, of sun, and of Saturn. So it's actually quite a fascinating and, you can tell, intense topic, but I think that it's something that we need to consider and understand because we're moving into this crazy era of like going into space and we're going to mine the asteroids and we're going to colonize everything, and that kind of attitude is devoid of genuine spiritual understanding, and so we need to return to the deeper knowledge about how we came here and how we came to be, and we need to be precise about it. Okay, this next question is from Belle Blue. I am fascinated by the Pentecostal church and their use of prayer in tongues. is it the same prayer in tongues that the ancient Lemurians used? And or is it genuinely connected to the Christ stream? Many famous soul singers have belonged to the Pentecostal church, like Marvin Gaye, Bill Withers, Elvis Presley. They all seem to have been connected strongly to the Holy Spirit. Actually, singing is a very powerful way to connect to the Holy Spirit, to connect with God. And when you clairvoyantly see into higher planes, you will actually see spiritual beings singing and saying magical words and using tone. And you'll see sound and singing as a way to harmonize the soul. And so the idea of gospel, the idea of in the Eastern traditions, the chanting and the mantra and the singing and song there is a direct representation of real things that happen in higher worlds with angelic beings. Sound and singing is very, very important. And it harmonizes the mind, it harmonizes you with others, and it is extremely spiritual. In the Lemurian epoch, this is where we first see humanity actually take a physical form. So in the earlier epochs of the Earth, the recapitulations of the non-physical planet, the humanity wasn't actually physical yet. And this is something that we need to understand about our creation, is that our creation began when we were not even physical. And we materialized here according to precise spiritual encounters and laws. And so in the Lemurian phase, we finally see humanity begin to materialize. And humanity is in a quasi-physical etheric state. And humanity, as soon as it begins to physicalize, it also begins to sense spirit within them. And so Lemuria is where we get the very basic rudiments of our spiritual tradition, and how that came through was actually through song and what was through dance. And so early humanity felt spirit. They felt it and they expressed it. Now, it was mainly women. Women have the negative polarity. They have a negative polarity in their physicality and in their very essence. And then they have a positive polarity within their etheric body. Males are the opposite. So females have more of a predisposition towards connecting with spirit directly. And that manifested very clearly in the Lemurian epoch, as it was more of a matriarchy, and you had the era and time of the true high priestess who was able to connect with spiritual forces. And she would do that through basically singing and basically creating tones and dancing. And when she did this, everybody would be sort of amazed. They could feel it, and they would do it along with her. And that was bringing and moving the spirit in very early humanity. And then as we move into the Atlantean epoch, that becomes more streamlined, and you start getting more of that masculine influence that brings it into specificity. So you start getting real symbols being created that represent spiritual things. And you start getting more of a, by Atlantis, you start getting real temple cultures more similar to where we are or where we were, at least probably in, ancient India or Egypt and things like that. You start getting extremely streamlined magical practices. But it all began with singing, it began with dancing and directly expressing what you're feeling. And a vestige of that is speaking in tongues. So I think there's a very real aspect to that. I think you can be moved by the Holy Spirit, and I think that you can be drawn to vocalize that. But I think it also, I don't think that people should be made to speak in tongues, or I don't think that there should be any pressure on people. I think sometimes it's a little theatrical. But yeah, I mean, that is, you can be moved and you can create sounds. I mean, and I think people enjoy that. And who am I to tell them not to, Okay, this is from a member. is it possible for people who don't have hyperphantasia or intense memories to progress spiritually as well as those who do? Okay, so hyperphantasia and spiritual progression, which is basically like, okay, so if you don't have prolific clairvoyance and inner sight, can you still develop spiritually? Absolutely. Yes, absolutely you can. Um, the whole thing is that everybody has their own unfoldment process, and not everybody, you know, not everybody has completely obvious spiritual visions or even gets inundated with clairaudience, which is spiritual sounds. Um, those are the most obvious clairs. A lot of people actually have what I call the lunar clairs or the quiet clairs. And that means that they are empaths, which means they are getting a ton of psychic information essentially as emotional feelings. So many people are incredibly empathic and they just have no idea. You could be more powerfully empathic as a psychic than a clairvoyant, yet you could live your whole life not realizing it, because what ends up happening is that you're just picking up on emotional energy everywhere, or energies that are experienced as feeling, and you think it's yours. So you can be incredibly psychic as an empath, and you just literally think that every person's feeling on the subway is really you. And that's why spiritual education is so important, because if you're one of these people, you can feel absolutely crazy. Going in public can be difficult for you. You know, you need to actually live in a way that honors how you are psychic, right? So, the thing about clairvoyance and why everyone loves clairvoyance and wants to like directly develop clairvoyance is because it's very validating. And when you have when you're claircognizant, which is basically getting a claircognizance, means that you are getting information, just downloads of information. Again, the problem with that, as more of a lunar clair, is that you think it's your own thoughts. So you're being just as psychic as someone hearing a voice or seeing a vision, but because it's quiet, because it's subtle, you think that like it's not, you think it's your own thought. And there's so many people actually who are geniuses or savants or who come up with a really good idea. They think it's their idea, and it's literally a spiritual force that's using them, a higher spiritual force that's using them. And so those quiet abilities can actually be more intense technically than someone who seems very clairvoyant, but you don't feel like they are because of how they manifest within you. So the reason why people like clairaudience and they like clairvoyance is because they're very obvious. And they're also very easy to validate, because if you get a vision, you can often validate the vision. Something will happen or whatever. So in other words, absolutely not. You do not have to, just because someone has like intense and powerful clairvoyance or the ability to read the Akashic record with this visible, incredible power, that doesn't mean that they're going to be more spiritually developed than anyone else. Because really, if you really want to know what creates spiritual power, including, different abilities, it's really your ability to be selfless. This is what nobody, wants to talk about, because it's not sexy. It's more sexy to probably talk about like, the third eye and this and that or whatever. But actually what really prepares you and makes it possible for you to develop psychically is actually selflessness, and dedication to God, and even self-sacrifice. Those are actually the qualities that will make you psychic. And that's because you're sort of purifying your vessel. That's how you purify your vessel. And so psychic abilities aren't something that you pick out of a catalog and say, oh, I want this, I'm going to directly develop this. They develop because they develop as a indirect ratio to our own process of enlightenment or our own dedication to spiritual development. Essentially, they come on naturally. And if somebody has incredible clairvoyant powers, they got that really probably built up from another life. So how abilities work as well is that whatever manifests for you in this life are the fruits of past lives in which you've developed these things. This is why you can see these savants and things like that. The soul already has that skill set brought in, whether it be in intuitive capacity or whether it be the ability to play the piano, whether it be some kind of ability to do art. That's already within the soul, right? And so we are many different lives that we live, right? This is the law of reincarnation. And we can either develop those or they can retreat. So in every single life, you have the responsibility to develop them, right? To develop yourself. If you don't, then in your next life, you can actually lose spiritual abilities and you can actually lose psychic powers and things like that if you're not aligning yourself properly with higher forces. So this is in the case of dark magicians and people who may have some kind of power built up, but they dwindle it away because they're selfish with it. That means the next life you're not going to have that kind of power again. So this is how it goes when we look at it in a large scale, but the entire soul. Okay, cavalry. Hi, Gigi. I've watched you since I was 18, so 8 years. Wow. I love your work, and it has been a critical element in my own salvation. Oh, I'm so glad. I have felt the call to provide back to the community in my own way, and have run into a lot of fear about generating a platform or online community of my own. How do you cope with hyper ego stroking compliments or hate comments or just the customer service side without burning out on people altogether? Yes. Okay. So I do have to say that there is a big difference between having a spiritual practice where you love to study esoterica and you like to take it in a casual personal way. It can be a great love for you. And then actually working in the field and doing it every day and doing it as a public figure and dealing with everything that comes along with that. And so these are two very different things. And so if you're wanting to enter into public teaching, I think that's wonderful. I think we need more people who can teach and support and things like this. We need this. But deep within your heart, you have to absolutely make sure that this is what you want to do. And you have to figure out, okay, is this something that I just love and that I'm always going to have in my life, but it's private and personal to me? Or is this really something that I want to do and dedicate my life to and be a public person? So you really have to figure out, are you in that category? Because being a public teacher, I think, is one of the most challenging things that you can do. You have to be, I think, suited for it, and you have to make sure that you are. Just being honest about that. So how do you deal with ego stroking compliments or hate comments? Well, you're going to get both. You're going to get both and everything in between. Sometimes the hate comments and criticism is the best thing you'll ever have, because sometimes what you feel like is hate is actually viewers and people who adore you, and they just want to make sure that you're seeing a full side of something, or you may not be aware of something. And so you have to be humble enough to go into your comment section and listen to people And you have to know that, listen, you're not the be all end all of anything. You're just a human being that's here, that's doing what you love, but you're not the be all end all. Other people have insight and other people can make you stronger. So sometimes what feels like hate is not hate. It's actually people who care about you, who are wanting you to see things because they want you to do well. And so you have to have your ego in check there so that you can receive that. We are one big community here, you know, and you can't put that pressure on yourself to be everything for everyone all the time and be perfect. It's just not real. It's just not reality. No matter how much you want to be, no matter how much responsibility you feel. And so if it's real hate comments, which I really consider to be like ad hominem attacks, I mean, that's increased in the last, I would say in general on most people's channels and on social media, that's increased. I think people are becoming much more frustrated. You know, in the beginning of the internet, you know, everyone was just glad to be here, I think. And there was like an amazement with being able to stream and talk and hang out. And I think people were kind of on better behavior. But I think with politics happening and the you know, everything dividing, I feel like people are have much less patience. And I think people have also become paranoid. And so you do get hate comments, but the same thing with compliments. I mean, what, no, you know, it's your mission. You know, you have a mission. You know, you have what you are setting out to do. You have your connection with spirit, with God, and you know, no matter what someone says, whether it be positive or negative, you still have to get up in the morning and write your lecture. You still got to go on camera at whatever day and answer questions. It doesn't matter what anybody says because you have to do that from your own place of creativity and your own love for God and your love for this work. So it doesn't really matter either way because you're still going to go forward and do that. But you do have to develop thick skin, I would say, because especially with hate comments, the ones, have you ever noticed that like you can get a hate comment and you're like, oh, that's stupid, I don't, that doesn't mean anything to me, it's fine. And then you get a comment and you're like, oh, you know, it's like, oh, that hurt, that one hurt. And the ones that hurt because there's a lesson in there for you. It hurts because maybe there's a part of you that believes what they have to say, and maybe it's true, maybe it's not. But you might be believing something about yourself or have an insecurity or something within yourself that you're hiding or whatever. And that comment brought that out of you. So that can even be a positive thing, you know, in order to know that part of yourself better. So I think the more that you do this, the easier it becomes. Because honestly, you go through being destroyed all the time, being insulted, and then you also get the beautiful, you know, love letters from people that you've helped, and that helps. But none of that matters. None of that really, really matters. Because you have to get up in the morning and do what you're going to do, no matter what the response is, because that's your journey, that's your path. And so appreciate and love the support as it comes in. But the more that you need those compliments, the more that you need people to accept you, the more that you need people to like you, and that becomes something that you need. You need to be famous or you need to be a public figure or whatever it is, the more vulnerable you are to criticism. Right? It's a double-edged sword. So you have to have a relationship with God. And it's you and that relationship. And that's the most important thing in your life. And that's where you operate from. And if a good comment comes in, that's amazing. You know that you're on the right track, at least from that little perspective. If a bad one comes in, you try to use that if you can, and it makes you better. And that's my advice there. Okay, dark and light. I think I see Okay. Dark light. What is a lost soul? Can a soul be fragmented, and how can it be healed? How do you think speaking in tongues is? Oh, the speaking in tongues questions tonight. Thanks. I recently started to see your videos and they have helped me understand much. Oh, thank you, Dark Light. Thank you for submitting this question. So, a lost soul is, I would classify that as somebody who is kind of lost to themselves. You are never, ever truly lost. You are never, ever truly alone. With you stands your angels, and with you stands spiritual forces that are so powerful and so loving that you would weep if you knew the actual spiritual forces that were guiding you every moment and protecting you. You'd probably weep if you saw how much love there is for you in heaven and in the spirit world. And so what happens is, and even within you, there's no matter who you are, within you, within your being is so much beauty. You know, you are a child of God. You are a spiritual being. You are you have divinity within you. And so you are beautiful. But what happens is that we don't acknowledge it. And we can come into circumstances in our life that make us feel like we're not good enough and make us feel like we're bad or we're wrong. And we become beaten down. And when that happens, we lose ourselves. And even though we have all of these spiritual forces that surround us at all times, we can't feel them. And so people become lost when they lose their own sense of spirit, when they lose their connection to God. That's when we become lost. And when we lose our connection to God, it doesn't stop us from deep down knowing that God exists. And so what we do is we try to make the government God, right? We try to make machines God. We try to make another human being God. This is what we do when we're lost. We have a hole in our heart, a hole in our being, a hunger that we don't know how to fill. And that is where Christ sits in the heart, where we should be connecting with that force. And so that is when we become lost. And in order to become found, in order to rise and discover ourselves, we have to turn into our heart. We have to heal. And we have to begin to feel that presence within us and accept it and notice it. And it's only through inner work and inner focus that we can heal that. It's never going to be through something external. It's always going to be from turning inward that we discover ourselves and we discover meaning and purpose and just that very deep-seated knowing that you are loved, you know, that you are part of something much greater than yourself. We all crave that. We all need that. So we have to work in our life towards healing and removing mindsets and beliefs that prevent us from truly exploring that. Okay, this next question is from the speaking in tongues. I guess I just commented on that, so I won't go any more into that. Okay, this one is from Nikita Jade Moon. How to balance intuitive power or connection to the higher realms, childlikeness and an open mind and faculties, and also good groundedness, assertiveness, and sobriety. It can be challenging to juggle the two and deal with the world like that, especially as an adult. I agree. You know, this is also kind of a question about the feminine impulse within humanity and the masculine impulse, I think, as well. And all you can really do is, what I would recommend is that you don't want to sort of interact with the world and people through what you think you need to be doing. I think I should be soft in this situation. Or I think I need to be assertive. I think I need to be more sober around this. It doesn't come from you intellectually analyzing something and then deciding to be a certain way. How you know how to be in any situation is by simply being completely grounded and balanced in your body and in a place of serenity and harmony. And so when you're in that place of deep interconnection, and you can go into any situation and you can find yourself adapting and being the force that's necessary. But it's a completely natural, intuitive way of being and interacting. Because your mind, if you're just trying to analyze everything from your mind may tell you, oh, I need to be assertive here. But it could just be coming from your desire to dominate someone or your desire to feel more in control. And what's really needed is sort of more of a passive energy, maybe listening, maybe just loving, right? So the mind never really knows how we should be, really. It's our heart that knows that. It's the intuition within our heart that lets us know how we have to be with each other, because the heart connects to other people's heart field and other people's being. And that's how we connect. The mind will only really tell you things based on past patterns or survival. It's really the heart center that lets us know how to be with each other and with other people, with even in business relationships or love relationships. It's the heart center and just being present. And you have to have a practice where you meditate every single day and you become comfortable in your body. So many people, walk around and they're not comfortable in their body. They're not comfortable in their, in their nervous system. They're actually in a state of trauma, which means that they're always analyzing and things, and how we really need to be with each other is from the heart. And it's like a cliche at this point, that's where our serenity and center comes from. And it doesn't mean that you don't think, it doesn't mean that you don't use your mind. It's that your mind itself operates differently when it's balanced by the heart center. So you're still using your mind. It's just that when the heart center is activated and open and flowing, it allows the mind to work in harmony with it. And that's how we can sense and feel how to be when and how to create balance, really, in our relationships. Because again, like if you're analyzing how you need to be with someone or what's necessary, there's a really good chance it's coming from pain. It's the heart center, which is a love center, and the seat of empathy, the seat of compassion, the seat of wisdom, a special kind of wisdom, a transpersonal wisdom that we really find when we have a serene connection with it. Our true self comes forward. And that is really where we want to enter into our relationships with and from. Okay, this one is from Over the Moon. Okay, thank you for all the incredible knowledge you share. I've been hearing the same overall message from many different spiritual teachers. The message is that widespread war is coming in our lifetime, that humanity has now reached a point of an inevitable reset, which will allow for a birth of something better. That is, if we survive. What are your thoughts on this? Okay, good question. So I think how we have to enter into this topic is we have to be able to recognize the overall pattern that we're in. So it doesn't really do much good to just view where we are as humanity as a fragment, as though this is the only civilization that's existed in the last 10,000 years or something, and this is all that's ever been. If we want to understand where we are now, we actually have to be able to understand where we've been and analyze and compare. So there are many different epochs. Well, not many. There are 7 different epochs that exist within our post-Atlantean epoch. So every planet has different developmental periods. And every epoch rises and falls. And so it begins, it rises into a golden age in which the qualities and characteristics of that epoch reach its peak. And then it falls or decays or becomes decadent, and you enter periods of war and distress. And then you usually get cataclysms. And then from the ashes, Earth and humanity rises again. So what I'm trying to say here is that civilizations fall and rise, and even entire planetary epochs fall and rise. So everything that we're seeing is normal, it's natural, and it's a recapitulation of these same patterns that have happened in Atlantis and in Lemuria, and that we can expect this. So there's a certain power that comes from essentially you understanding that you're in a larger cycle of development. This isn't just coming out of nowhere. This period of intense corruption and, tyranny, and every single day there's another weird news story that we have to confront. Yeah, that's about right. There's a power that comes with being able to say, yeah, that's about right. We're reaching the end of our planetary. We're reaching the end of our era and the beginning of a new one. I've gone into this in more detail in my lecture called "The War of All Against All." So most people who are sensitive will sense this. And what happens at the end of an era is you have this intense battle between dark and light. And you get the forces of light that are trying to essentially wake up and educate humanity and make sure that, as many people as possible have access to the knowledge and energies that are going to nourish them and awaken them to carry on. And then you also have a lot of dark forces that see this as an incredible opportunity to harvest, to be quite honest, harvest energy from the planet. And they try to create as much chaos, as much confusion, as much darkness as possible in order to stop people from waking up. Because, what ends up happening is that most people don't wake up unless they're confronted with losing everything that they have or losing things. It's really unfortunate, but that's where we are as human beings, is until something we hold very dear is threatened, we don't usually wake up. Which is why you can have absolute maniacs running the world that are, tyrannical like perverts, and people, the masses, don't see it, right? Is because only when it gets really bad do people wake up. And so there is this, there has to be that impulse created from within of self-development that leads to the ability to see darkness in the world. That's what's needed. And so this intense battle between dark and light happens at the end of every era. And you have some forces that push to harvest humanity to prevent them from waking up. And all sorts of things go on that have to do with this battle. There's also incredible light that emerges. You do get incredible awakening. You get people who have the potential to awaken more in one lifetime than they would in 10, because there's so much of a focus and an effort on the desire to create balance when things get darker. So it's absolutely normal that you would get spiritual teachers that would be tuning into this overall pattern that we're going through. It's been written out for, it's not our first rodeo. We went through the fall of Atlantis. We went through the fall of Lemuria. Those are the two most recent ones we'd actually remember. And in fact, a lot of the issues that are happening now are the exact same issues that we dealt with in Atlantis. It's literally just a recapitulation of the fall of Atlantis and a little bit of a different energy, essentially. And that's how the human spirit evolves over these long periods of time, how the planet evolves. So it's not really like a reset in like the Klaus Schwab way. I mean, those are opportunists. Those are like the ultimate grifters that know we're moving into the age of Aquarius and want to prevent as many people as possible and, you know, kind of usher them into their weird transhumanism like dystopia, right? But it's something that the planet does as it moves from civilization to civil. I mean, even you can even look and see, you know, the fall of the Indian Empire, the fall of the Roman Empire, the fall of the Persian Empire. I mean, you can look and you can see it even in the most macro, I mean, even in the most micro level of just civilizations themselves lasting around 2,000 years before they become decadent. So we know that this happens. It's just, how is it happening for us? And how do we bring in the balancing forces to make sure that there is a path that is exalted so that no matter what we're going through, we can rise. That's what's really important. Okay, this is from Mark. Can you explain what the soul is exactly? Is it a separate being that's with the I in its body? So the soul, I mean, in modern spirituality, the soul is sort of like your spiritual aspect, which is the most simple way to view it. But if you start getting into spiritual science, what we would consider the soul would actually be several different sheaths or bodies, and their energy bodies. And they kind of all together make up what traditionally would be called the soul. So most people would think of the soul as like basically all the spiritual bodies or all the sheaths in one. So the etheric body, the astral body, and then the I or the ego. But the closest thing to the actual soul would be the I or the ego. And that is sort of like your individuality. Without the I, or without the I is like the I am. It's self-awareness, but it's also an actual spark of individuality. And that would be the closest thing to the soul. And then that wears the sheaths of the etheric body, the physical body, the astral body. And they're sort of like the organs of the I, really. A very interesting teaching on this is actually in Anthroposophy, the idea of spiritual economy. If you want to understand the sheaths and the I absolutely love those lectures. Very deep though. So that is the soul. And it you know, I should mention that not everybody technically has one. If you ascribe to the spiritual scientific system, you can essentially, everybody has the capacity to essentially develop their soul. But you can also not develop a soul, and that can make you an empty vessel. So you can actually have human beings that technically don't have much of an I. They don't have much of a soul, and they sort of exist to be, unfortunately, like vehicles for dark entities. And then you have other people who have a very well-developed I or a very well spiritualized ego, and they're like masters incarnate, and they can command their higher bodies, you know, at will. And so everybody has the opportunity to develop their I, or develop their soul or develop their ego, their I am. That's the task of our, post-Atlantean epoch, really. But not everybody does. And if you're going to have the ability for someone to become, a completely exalted spiritual master, right? You also, at the same time, have to have the potential that you fail, that you don't develop an I. And so that exists as well. And so that's the soul. Cynthia. Okay. All right. I am super interested in the topics you discuss on your channel. And I'm wondering if there is a name for this field of study or resources where I can learn more about all of it. Yeah. Okay. So I essentially teach based in anthroposophy. So my favorite system is the anthroposophical system, which is, in a broader sense, I would say it's also called spiritual science or occult science, esoteric Christianity. That's my chosen system. There are other systems out there that some people teach from, but everybody is teaching from a system. Everybody out there who is a spiritual teacher is using some kind of system, even if they're just, channeling an entity or something. There is a spiritual scaffolding that they are referring to, whether it be like an entity they're channeling or whether it be an actual system that they're able to learn and teach from. And so that is essentially where I resonate the most. But I also will read and reference anything. I read and work with all different types of spiritual texts and esoteric material. It's just over the years I found anthroposophy to be the most succinct and the most resonant with me. But I read a lot of Eastern texts. And if I'm not studying and working in that way, I am having my own practice where I receive information and visions and memories and things like that. And that's the other major portion of my work. And everything is pretty much seeded from my own vision, my own, I think, what I think is important, or it all stems from something that occurs within me, an impulse. And then I prefer not to just say, oh, well, I just channeled this the other day. So I like to try to support everything that I see or everything that I already know within myself. I try to find and include other teachings and works that support that, which I would consider a very normal way of teaching. And so that's what you'll find on my channel. Okay, this is from Tammy. Okay. Hi, Gigi. With Christmas just around the corner, can you talk more about Mary? You once mentioned she became pregnant with Jesus intentionally through ritual, and I think you said she was more of a high priestess, and Mary was a title, not a birth name. I am curious to know more about her and the conception of Jesus and how she was chosen for this honor. Okay, this is a big one. So there's actually, if you read the Gospels, you'll find that there's actually two Jesus boys. Okay, there's the Nathan Jesus and there's the Solomon Jesus. Now, this is explained in anthroposophy very clearly. And I can't get into all of it tonight because I do want to lecture more on the Marian feminine mysteries in the coming year. But in traditional Orthodox Christianity and even in esoteric Christianity, the feminine aspect is not extrapolated. It really is. It's really sort of centered more around, I would say, the masculine side, which is fine. It's totally fine. That's what's necessary for the era. But moving forward, we're going to need to understand the feminine aspect of the Christ principle. It's something that we're going to have to know. And so we need to bring out a deeper understanding about Mary. Why are the two women in Christ's life called Mary? Is that the only name going around or what? No, it's a title. It's the old Atlantean title of the high priestess, Mari. Now, for Orthodox Christians, this is just going to be a big no. But on the esoteric side of things, you know, the Christ impulse existed on the planet and within humanity and within the cosmos before it incarnated into Jesus. There were actually 3 prior Christ events, sacrifices of Christ, before he even entered into Jesus of Nazareth, or the Nathan Jesus. So what we know about Christ is, I think as a collective, is very little. And I think in the future we have to flesh that out a little bit more. The two Marys refer to the 2 different aspects of the feminine consciousness. And this is not Rudolf Steiner here or anything. This is my own opinion through my own memories and my own experiences. But they represent 2 different aspects of the feminine, and 2 different sort of feminine streams, the different Marys. Because there were 2 different Christs, there were 2 different Jesuses, 2 different Jesus boys. And this is clear when you read in the Gospels, they're born in different locations. There's different stories around them. And a lot of people just overlook that. But if you want to argue that the Bible is fact and everything in there is true, you have to say, why is there discrepancy? And so how I personally read that, again, this is my personal understanding, is that there's actually 2 different modes of conception. And one had to do with the very old ways. In order to conceive the Nathan line, there's a special kind of conception that's needed because the Nathan soul was basically unfallen and pure. Okay, so that required a certain kind of conception that does not have an earthly father. Can't have that. Okay, and then so you're looking at Atlantean, a vestige of the Atlantean priestess cults, and you're looking at immaculate conception or parthenogenesis. The other one represents something else, and it represents the Zoroaster Solomon line, which is an earthly line and the highest earthly wisdom imaginable. So one's heavenly and one's earthly, and that had a different conception process. So I will be getting into this later, but that's my read on it at this point. Also you can see in this, you can see how in very early aspects, in very early periods of our development, all humanity was created through parthenogenesis, right? That's how humanity formed. It was basically an Eve and a daughter cell would come off of it. In the earlier epochs, for the Polarian and Hyperborean epoch, it was all basically immaculate conception. That's what quantifies our early development. And then only from basically the end of Lemuria to Atlantis do we get the ability to sexually reproduce as we do now. But there still remained that ability to basically become impregnated by parthenogenesis for a very long time. It was retained in the highest priestess classes because you could pull into you a soul that was basically very pure. And that's how the kingly births happened in Atlantis. They were all like that. But it was very difficult to carry it into the post-Atlantean epoch. It became harder and harder and harder to do. Okay, and this is where you get some really dark, weird stuff going on with Rosemary's Baby and these weird witch people that are having sex with demons and stuff. It's all these old conception rites that were from Atlantis that different mystery groups were using. But the highest order of it on the feminine side was being able to birth a king, which was from the solar line, the kingly line that would be able to lead and guide humanity. And that was a specific practice that you had to learn to do. A little vestige of that is the Melissae and the Vestal Virgins. Very small little, there's little hints of it. But again, the feminine mysteries are in very, very poor condition. Most of the stuff is darkened with some weird stuff going on. But that's my view of it. I think that the conception, I personally think at this point, the conception of the Nathan soul was different than the conception of the other one. That's just my understanding of it. And I will go more into this because the way that I'm going to be lecturing into next year is going to require a lot of the Venus mysteries, which is the feminine aspect. So the Marian tradition, the esoteric Marian tradition is needed to understand actually technology. So I'm going to be getting a little bit more into that. I did talk about this in Summoning Souls, though, as well, in the first half hour of my Summoning Souls lecture. So yes, the highest sort of exalted thing that you could do in the feminine mysteries was obviously birth a sun king. that was one of the things that you would train for, and that's what the high, and that's why, you know, Mary is called the Queen of Heaven. It's all a little vestige of the very old Marian tradition that's pretty much gone and overshadowed and quite frankly lost. Okay, this one is from Elton Taft. Gigi, can you address the Elohim as aliens movement taking place on X? They have taken certain texts from the Torah and basically made all Elohim and archangels out to be the bad aliens. Clearly, they are trying to destroy our spiritual foundations and tuning folks away from our spirituality and our growth through our spirituality. Interesting. So the Elohim is just like one term that basically means angel, but the context that it's used is solar angel. So the Elohim are talking about non-physical solar angels or archangels of the solar nature or the solar hierarchy that essentially have been guiding humanity since its very beginning, when it was not even physical. And so when you say, you know, made in the image of, and all those passages that describe the Elohim, they're actually talking about a spiritual process that basically materializes. And you're talking about a spiritual process, a deeply spiritual process that physicalizes, that sort of happens again and again and again, over and over again as humanity evolves. And what ends up happening is during the dark age, the fallen period of any epoch, what happens is you basically get an influx of fallen forces. And these fallen forces create an inversion of the golden age, the age that man was patterned and essentially receiving spiritual forces. So there's a light age of creation where the human being is basically patterned with all of the archetypal information they need to carry out and live that epoch. And this also has to do with the Adam Katamon, right? And also the Manu in the Eastern and Western traditions. So the solar angels have a direct relationship with the Manu, and the Manu in the Eastern tradition is basically like Noah. So the Eastern Indian tradition has the same flood myth that we do, except in the Western tradition, we call him Noah, right? That's the Manu, or the Adam kind of Kadmon of the Western mysteries. In the Eastern mysteries, we have a figure called the Manu. And if you go into First Nations traditions, they also have these flood myths that talk about the beginning of the post-Atlantean epoch, after the Atlantean epoch, and basically humanity being spiritually influenced, the etheric body of humanity being spiritually affected, so that over time they sort of manifest different physical qualities. But this is all happening in a harmony, right? And this happens every epoch. So there's a Manu, or a Christ figure, or really a different incarnation of the Adam soul in every different epoch that has the new etheric template of mankind, and every time we're evolving. And so during the Dark Age, the Dark Era, humanity becomes challenged. And you also have not the Elohim solar angels that actually suffered greatly to give humanity. They had to sacrifice something of themselves in order to actually give humanity the form and faculties they have. So it's actually kind of weird when the term Elohim isn't properly understood, because it essentially removes the sacrifice of these higher angelic beings, and eventually the sacrifice of Christ. That's what all of the alien God stuff wants to do ultimately, is remove Christ's sacrifice and remove all the Christ influence, including the solar angels, and just leave you with this highly technological alien God religion that really doesn't contain anything real. And it will just make you more and more paranoid and more deluded the more that you believe it. So the alien God ideology essentially starts at the Dark Age. It doesn't include or understand anything spiritual. To that mindset, that doesn't exist. They think that the Elohim are physical aliens that have genetically modified. No, those are fallen angels. Those are the exact inversion of the higher angels, which are called the Elohim, but they're also called solar angels. Okay. And so what happens is they actually modify the human form because they're fallen, and they need to be able to have human beings to incarnate into, or to overshadow and essentially overtake. And they cannot basically exist anymore, have any influence on the planet, unless the human form is degenerated. So all of the qualities that the solar Elohim, or that the solar angels have given humanity through impressing it upon the etheric body and it manifesting, all of those have to be reversed. And so during every dark age of an epoch, there is a period of tampering with the human form in order to degenerate it. Now, when humans were not yet physical, when we were still quasi-physical, this happened through, the Luciferic and Armonic demonic entities working upon and messing with etherically our form, putting blocks in, moving things around. So that happened in a less physical way as well. In the Polarian epoch, in the other epochs of the earth that were non-physical, there was also interference, but nobody really talks about it because it was so non-physical. But during Atlantis, and even during Atlantis is really where you see the alien God ideology come to life, because finally humanity's physical, which means that for the most materialist minds, that's where things begin. So a lot of people who have a completely materialist, literalist mindset, the human story really begins in like Atlantis or like Lemuria. It's not true, right? That's only when we materialized. So do you see it? It's dropping everything downward. And so in the dark era, in the dark age, you get intense interference from fallen angels or archons in the Gnostic tradition and demonic entities, and they're trying to basically prevent humanity from being able to evolve and rise into the next age. Because if humanity is moving forward in their development, the risk is that they're actually going to move beyond reach of these fallen dark entities. And so all the stories you hear about genetic manipulation and genetic modification and all that kind of stuff, those are fallen angels. Those aren't Elohim. Those are fallen angels. Yes, it happened. Yes, there's a problem with it. It's happening now. It's happening now. Why are we going through that now? And so the fallen angels are now trying to call themselves and get people to think that they're the Elohim, which removes our understanding of our actual creation and our actual evolution, obviously. It's just getting rid of a whole aspect of our development and past, and it's what they do every single time. And a lot of people are falling prey to it because they look around and they say, well, look at all the corruption. Obviously, there's something dark going on. Obviously, black magic exists. Obviously, there's some pretty sick people out there doing some sick things. Yeah, that's always existed. Go back and look at Babylon. Go back and look at Atlantis, at some of the darker things that were going on there. Go back and look at Lemuria. Yeah, we always have a dark age, and they always try to interfere, but that interference is not our creation. And if somebody can convince you that you were created in a petri dish by an alien, you're in trouble. You're in trouble because your mindset is not going to acknowledge your actual spiritual materialization on the planet. You're not going to be able to see yourself as a spiritual being. You're going to see yourself more as a slave, and you're going to have a very dark paradigm. And so I think this ideology is fundamentally driven by fear, by a desire to remove tyranny, which I can respect and I can acknowledge that. But if you're believing that, you're only going to feed it, because that's not our creation. You can't take events that happened in the Lemurian epoch or even earlier and interpret them as physical. That's called literalism. Okay, that's not how a lot of these spiritual texts are meant to be read when it's describing our creation. And you have to understand, again, that in the dark age of any epoch, you get interference from fallen angels. It's part and parcel. That interference from fallen angels that call themselves aliens because they don't want you to know that they're fallen angels, and they come up with all these different words, and I came from this planet or that planet or whatever. Yeah, that's because they want you to think that they created you. So don't get mixed up on essentially the alien god ideology. You know, sure, were humans tampered with? Okay, sure. But that's not their creation. And so you have to be able to really parse that out and really understand that, because there's going to be a lot of movements, which is why I've done more. I've been talking about this for years. Y'all, I've been talking about this for years. I have lectured almost exclusively on this topic for 2 years. You know, so if you want to know more, check out my Mars Mysteries series, where I go into it extremely clearly. This particular ideology that aliens created humanity is the origin myth of the secret society behind the German Reich. Okay, it came up through people like George Van Tassel in the 50s, okay, who was working for the government and said he was having these contacts with these aliens, and aliens created humanity, and it's the whole fallen angel ideology. And then you see the same thing with people like Eric von Daniken, Zachariah Sitchin, and it just goes from 1950s onwards, this juggernaut of propaganda to tell you that you were created by aliens. and to tell you that, you know, the fallen angels are really the angels. It's a whole inversion that began then, but it's traced back to the secret societies behind the Third Reich. This is their ideology. This is what they believe. And so you can very clearly see, if you look at it, what that sort of very left-hand path ideology looks like compared to the actual story, which is very different. You're going to see both of these things confront you in the next few years. And ultimately, it's going to be up to you. It's going to be up to you and what you want to believe and what you want to give your time to, because, you know, like in other periods before, you are going to decide what you align with. Okay, Eli, are you familiar with the Spiritist movement and their channeled books discussing the different evolutionary phases of each planet? They believe that Earth is a planet that we must come to in order to address our past karma. It is meant to be a planet of expiation, and each planet has its purpose. I have not heard of that, but I agree with that. If you look at how the death process is portrayed, you get the idea. You can also get an idea of the incarnation process, and also that the soul actually moves through these different planetary spheres once it passes away from the earth. And this is why practices like astrology are so popular and so valuable, is because through the understanding of the planetary spheres, we not only understand our character and things about us, but we also actually understand this macro solar system school that we're really a part of. And so every planet has its role that the soul essentially incarnates into and has a specific experience in, and it has a specific effect on the soul. It is a specific initiation. Saturn is an initiation. Mars is an initiation for your soul. Okay? The Venusian sphere, Venus, is an initiation. All of it has an effect on your soul and your overall soul development. Okay? Now, Earth is the most dense, the most material sphere thus far in our solar system. Now, you don't move through planetary spheres that are not within your solar system. So it's all through your sun. Now, there are very rare circumstances that a soul may go outside the sun, but for the vast majority of people, you are within your solar system school. Because to get through the sun is basically a kind of mastery, or it would require an entity of a certain mastery to be with you while you would exit the sun. So that is the structure that we're working with. And essentially, how I view it is the Earth is kind of like the densest, so it's kind of like a consolidation sphere, where it's literally like the bowels of the solar system. And if you go any further down, it's more dark than it is light. So if you think about the Earth, it's sort of like the Earth is affected very much by the supernatural kingdom of life, which is all the angelic hierarchies, these cosmic beings, these angels, you know, part of angelology. And then it's also influenced by the world of decay, the world of death, Hades, which lies beneath it, which is why it's portrayed as hell, usually, or the Naraka realm in Buddhism. And so we are sort of equally mixed between both, the human being. And other planetary spheres are not like that. You know, Venus is not like that. There's other planetary spheres in our system that do not have nearly the amount of darkness and death and decay. Rudolf Steiner said that the Earth is a place of death. You know, this is also where we see the sun directly incarnate into a human being and change the rhythm of the planet entirely, because it's in a way, it's also the midpoint of the system thus far. And so, yes, the Earth is very difficult. It's very hard because you're sort of at the very peak of the solar system development and the peak of the Earth development where we are now. Both of them, you have to basically develop an I, an individuality, and you have to confront evil. You have to look at it. You've got to look at it in yourself, and you've got to look at it in the world. That's hardcore. It's a hardcore experience for any soul. It's very hard, but this is also where the most powerful masters and individuals come from. So that's sort of how it works. Okay, Peony. Are there multiple solar systems like ours where beings like us are too evolving? Interesting. So I don't have a linear view of the solar system. I mean, of the cosmos. I have an evolutionary view of the cosmos and space. To me, the idea of just like expanding out exponentially in the material plane is a materialist view. And I don't believe it's actually possible the way that NASA and the way that science says. That's just me. That's just me with my own experience, my own clairvoyant visions and understanding of it, and what my guides tell me. So I don't actually see the cosmos as being understandable in a purely physical way, in a purely linear way. I feel like that's a product of our mind becoming too hardened in matter. And so every sun is a different developmental system. And there will be some relation to us, otherwise we wouldn't be able to see it. But it's going to have completely different parameters behind it, right? So the planets every planet in our solar system is essentially a different aspect of the sun. It's a different face of the sun. And when our solar system is basically done developing, all the planets will be reabsorbed into the sun, right? So every planet is really an aspect of the sun, or the sun in time. Or you could say that the sun or the solar plane is all planets out of time, timeless. And so in order to really understand another solar system, you have to master our sun. You have to become a solar being, and humanity doesn't get to that level until what's called Vulcan development. Really, that's when you really understand the solar system, and that's the last phase. And so we don't really have the ability to know what life is like exactly in the Pleiades or Sirius, because that's a different star. It's a different archetypal system that will have some overlap, or again, we wouldn't be able to perceive it, but it's not like a linear, it doesn't operate linearly like we think it does, right? Josh, do you believe the only way to avoid the mark of the beast will be to live off-grid? What do you believe the mark of the beast means? Okay, so the mark of the beast appears in Revelation, and it is the idea that you will have to have some kind of mark in order to do commerce, or basically to exist normally. And a lot of people are watching, the idea of transhumanism, all of the micro particles that are potentially being sprayed in the sky. And, as Elena Freeland would say, the sort of heavy meddling of humanity, meaning that we're becoming more and more seemingly infused with heavy metals and sort of made like less and less healthy. That kind of in general is the mark of the beast in a way. And then some people believe it's actually going to be some kind of microchip. It certainly does seem to fit very, very well with the idea of a social credit system where everything is interconnected, and you're basically not able to do anything unless you're part of this, tyrannical thing. And so I think that humanity is going to have a choice. I think that starting now, really. And I actually think that a lot of it's going to come down to this election too, because I feel like there's a very Mars oriented, and if you watch my series Mars Mysteries and have listened to my lectures, you're going to know what I mean by this, but sort of this fallen Mars impulse that really is like about the space bros and transhumanism and technology, and it's really the masculine impulse taken too far. So when the masculine impulse or the Mars impulse or masculinity is taken too far out of balance, it becomes obsessed with technology, and it becomes obsessed with externalism. So everything is done outside. It becomes too futuristic, and it begins to destroy nature. And it begins to think that everything can be done through a machine, and it has to be done through a machine. And eventually the externalism reaches such incredible peaks that they think they have to colonize other planets or colonize other worlds to survive, which directly denies the doctrine of resurrection, which is really something behind every religion that Christianity talks about the most. But it's this idea that there's this, you have to basically permanently exist in the material plane through colonization of different planets, but also through transhumanism and living forever. This is what happens when the masculine impulse or the Mars impulse becomes imbalanced. It also, at the very peak of it, will attempt to control women, starting with the reproductive system, and destroy women. That is what it does. Now, this happened already in its inverse in Lemuria. We had a matriarchy, and it reached some very dark times where women reached their period of devolution. And you saw them wanting to degrade men and not allow men to rise from a boy into a man, threatened by men, belittling men. This is the worst of the matriarchy, and it happened on the planet. Of course it did. People wouldn't be so damaged and wounded towards the opposite sex if they didn't have that within them. Of course we've been through that. And a lot of black magic in the fall of the matriarchy. And so at the very worst, you see humanity devolving into an animal condition and wanting to remain tribal. That's what the feminine consciousness does. The feminine consciousness wants everyone to become too tribal, too communal at the expense of the individual. Whereas the male consciousness, the Mars impulse, wants to push humanity into this hyper-futuristic, hyper-technological age, and it's too much of the individual, and that individuality never turns inward and becomes selfless and understands Christ. It's just this whole satanic technoism, and we're going to start to see that now. And it's going to happen in a really big way, and part of that is the mark of the beast. It's the fall of the masculine consciousness now. Everyone talks about Eve, and everyone talks about the fall of the feminine in Lemuria. I get it, we get it. But now we're looking at something different. We're looking at the fall of the male consciousness. And everybody has a male and a female aspect, has lived male and female lives. So this isn't about, it's not personal. We just have to know what we're looking at. So we will see a push towards transhumanism, a push towards people telling you that you can, use this contraption to heal your body and heal your mind. It doesn't matter. And you're going to get it. You're going to see it. And you have to see it. We have to go through it. But it's up to you how much you let this really cancer. And it's funny because I look at these conversations, these mark of the beast like conversations with people. And they're like, we have to go into it. We have to go through it. That's, it is what it is. And we don't actually. You're gonna determine where you are in this. So we're gonna see it unravel in in real time. And yeah, that's what I would say about that. Okay, this one is from Matea. Okay. I have a question about the future of Earth. Do you think that we will evolve with this physical Earth together and move on higher and all evil will leave this Earth, or we will move to new Earth and old Earth, which slowly decay with lower dimensions beings occupied her? Sorry, bad English. Greetings from Europe. That's okay, Matea. I think I understand what you're saying. So one of the things that we've been talking about today is sort of the rhythm of creation and how the earth evolves over time, and that we didn't just like pop into the earth. We've been, evolving with the earth for billions and billions of years as the earth has gone through many different phases of development, and also as the human being has developed different faculties, going from more of a group consciousness in Lemuria and early Atlantis to getting an I or an individuality, and now spiritualizing that and developing that. So that's our arc. And as we go, the earth is actually shifting density the whole time. Okay? Earth only reached its peak material density, its heaviest point in Atlantis. And ever since we've been actually rising and ascending out of matter, the Earth is actually losing matter all the time. So we have to understand, again, that's the big picture that we're working with. So when we reach the end of our earthly cycle, there's sort of a remediation or what's called in the Eastern mysteries a pralaya, which is kind of a sleeping period. And during that time, all of the souls that are from the life wave of the earth go through a process of, you could say, judgment, or they go through a process of, not like judgment in a righteous sense, but sort of wherever your development is, you will sort of find the right place that resonates with where you are. Now, it's all going to be in the context of the next embodiment of the earth, which is called Jupiter development. And there will be, the earth will begin again. It will recapitulate the first four epochs of the Jupiter earth will be a recapitulation of the last four. And then again, on the fifth epoch, something new will truly be created. And so you'll have a different kind of human being there. Technically, we would be at the level of angel at that point, the level of where angels are now. Okay. And so we will be spiritualized to that point, and we'll have a different kind of existence at that point. There will be a different dynamic, really. And Rudolf Steiner has written about this in Jupiter development. You can get a little bit more into this, but apparently what I found really interesting is that in that period of earthly development, you won't be able to hide the nature of your soul. So that's one of the things that makes that future development of the earth. This would be called New Jerusalem in the Christian mysteries, but in the New Age, it would be called like the New Earth, or like the 5D Earth. That's what we're talking about here. I'm just using classical esoteric terms. It's called New Jupiter, New Jerusalem, or the 5D Earth, or the higher Earth is what we're talking about. And on that development, we would technically be at the level of angel in the spiritual hierarchies. So we're part of the spiritual hierarchies, which is another reason why we have to get our understanding of Elohim correct, because we're part of that system. It's also why we have to get the mark of the beast information correct, because that's removing that birthright from us directly to go into that. And so on that higher earth, or the new earth, you can't actually hide the nature of your soul. So your body and your very appearance will actually take on the qualities of your soul. And so, at the turn of the century, uh, anthroposophical teachings, they actually talk about like evil groups. And these are people that look strange and they have kind of animalistic qualities because the soul is not fully developed, and there's a darkness to them that they did not purify. And so it's very interesting to think about that and see that there's a level of transparency that happens the more things evolve. And when we are on Earth, you can have someone who's absolutely, stunning and handsome or beautiful, but inside there can be something wrong going on. And then you can also have someone's appearance that is, not attractive, or someone can have something going on and they can be the most exalted spirit. And so there's a level of illusion and Maya to Earth, where the physical form doesn't necessarily represent the soul. It can, but not necessarily. Well, on Jupiter, on the new Earth, you can't hide, and your form represents your soul, and that continues on as the Earth evolves. So I always found that to be very interesting. So essentially, you have the Earth kind of splitting in two, and it is an alchemical process. Remember, all earthly spiritual processes can be likened to alchemy. So there is a dross that will fall away. This is called the eighth sphere in esoteric literature. And I've spoken about this quite a lot, but there's kind of a dross that falls off, which is kind of like the eighth sphere. And then the higher Earth emerges from that. Okay, and the eighth sphere has to do with what's called the second death in esoteric Christianity. All right, so that's sort of where if you're really dark and you don't have any development of an eye, you're looking at that situation. But again, at the end of the earthly life wave, before it rises into its higher form, the life wave is sort of reassessed. And when it pops into life again in a higher plane, which is called the Jupiter development, you get a different kind of Earth that is more advanced. Okay, that's what we're looking at. Okay, Tamika, you've mentioned some time ago about a gold realm. My understanding and perception, it's a golden stream of consciousness, female. I'm intrigued on any further knowledge and experiences or understanding you might like to talk about. Kindest regards. I'm trying to think about when I reference that. There are a couple realms that are associated with gold. First of all, the solar realm is associated with gold. The sun is associated with gold, and gold is the metal of the sun, just like copper is the Venusian metal, iron is Mars. So every metal actually has a planetary sphere associated with it. Tin is Jupiter. And so technically the gold realm is technically the sun, the solar realm. But there's also a deep secret about gold and spiritual gold, which is there's also a little realm in the earth, the deepest section of the inner earth, or the death plane, that's also gold. And that is also associated with the sun. And so it has to do with life and death and following the gold. Okay, this is a member question. Have you thought about creating a center for your teaching and community like Steiner's Gurdianum? Is that an appropriate thing at present? Is it a possibility for us at this point in time? I love this question. So in Switzerland, Rudolf Steiner created this incredible building. He actually had to build it twice because the first one was actually burnt down. And it is really like a temple school. It's a museum of his work. It's really kind of like a community because there's actually several different buildings. There's a theater. Oh, I've never been there, but I've looked at the pictures. So that's called the Goetheanum. He named it after Goethe, the German spiritual philosopher. And it is a light for a lot of people, and it serves as something to carry on his work, which deserves to be carried on. And I would love to have some kind of school or have some kind of center or lecture publicly and appear publicly. I actually kind of had plans for it a few years ago, but then wouldn't you know, the health thing hit. Have to be really careful with what I say because my videos have been getting dinged. It's actually bizarre. I had these different videos on my channel and they sat there for years and no one cared. And then now all of a sudden, it's not okay. So I'm just going to not say certain things. Basically when the health crisis happened, you couldn't really fly, you couldn't do certain things unless you participated. And I wasn't going to do that. So it sort of fell on the back burner. And it's, to be honest, that's something that I feel like is bigger than me. It's something that I want, but I'm so into just the working portion of it and just getting these lectures out and just showing up and doing everything that I need to do, that it's quite overwhelming to think about that. And I'd probably need help because that's just so much to take on. And of course, Rudolf Steiner had so many people around him helping him. And I don't really have that in that kind of way. It's really just Wolf and I. And so that's not something that I could really take on at this point. Hopefully I can have enough resources to do it in the future. I'd love to, but I don't have those kind of resources and I don't have that kind of system to create that, but I would love that, obviously. Maybe it will happen. Okay, this is from Scott Milla. What are the chances Elon is Ahriman incarnation, is the Ahriman incarnation Steiner talked about coming around this time? Interesting, because I've heard some very interesting arguments for the Antichrist. I love to explore those arguments. How I kind of see it is that there's the actual Antichrist incarnation, which in the anthroposophical system is called Ahriman. So if you ever hear me talking about that, that's the actual Antichrist, which is very specifically named after the Persian devil, essentially, because the big adversarial force that we face is not just the devil, but it's specifically materialism and scientific materialism. And in the anthroposophical system, it goes so much deeper into the Antichrist nature for our time, right? The adversarial forces for our time and what they are like specifically. And so the Antichrist, when we understand it through the anthroposophical lens, the Antichrist takes on a specific nature, which is a hyper-technological nature. Ahriman works through technology. He works through electricity. And he is cold and calculated. And it's not just Ahriman. There's also something called the spirit of the Antichrist, or the Antichrist spirit. And so there's essentially these different individuals that possess the spirit and nature of the Antichrist, but they're not actually the incarnation of Ahriman. And you can have people that contain an awful lot of that energy that really seem like the Antichrist, but they're kind of like the forerunners for it. And kind of like, I guess, John the Baptist for Christ. And so there's these different forerunners that basically carry so much of that energy that you could really say they are. And so I'm watching Elon Musk very closely, and I'm actually watching the political right very closely because, in my opinion, the political right is not nearly as skeptical of technology, of big tech right now as it should be. I think that we're going to get pulled into this sort of like the latest thing. I guess everyone got their memo, is that we're going to have this big battle with AI. And so you've got these different countries, these different factions that are developing the AI, and there's going to be this war for dominance and supremacy. And of course, we're being positioned so that we accept it. It is this battle that we're being told is going on, and perhaps it is to some degree. And that's all to get us to accept it. And not only accept it, but to accept Elon as we don't really want it. We don't really like AI. We can't stop it. So we may as well accept Elon's AI because he's the only individual that has taken on the degeneracy of the current administration. But whenever Elon Musk takes on a freedom issue, he's never the first to do it. Elon never leads the charge. Elon will take on a political issue like free speech after everybody has already fought for it a million times over. He'll wait until the algorithm comes in and tells him he should. He doesn't really champion a cause in the true heroic way of taking it on before anyone notices and bearing the yoke. That's not what Elon Musk does. Elon Musk waits until everybody has already said they wanted it, and he reads the algorithm to see that it's so many people are demanding it that finally he comes forward and does it. Now, there could be many different reasons for this, and at the end of the day, you have to take scraps if that's all you're given. We have to be, on some level, grateful that there is a free speech platform in Twitter. That's fine. But being worshipful of this man, being worshipful of Elon, and not understanding that we're being basically set up to accept Elon's version of AI or his fact, because let's be real here. And this is something that Dark Journalist has pointed out very well on his series, which is that what we are looking at with AI has already been developed decades ago. So one of the biggest mistakes that people make when they look at artificial intelligence is they think that like we're all going through this together. Like, oh my God, China's developing this artificial intelligence and Israel is developing this artificial intelligence, and we're all, all these different factions are developing it and we're all competing. No. They only roll out this technology once they're 10 systems ahead. We're not developing this together. We're not fighting an AI battle of different people developing different AIs and we have to win. They've had this technology and AI for decades in the military-industrial complex. They've already done this. They've already war-gamed it. You're not interacting with a real scenario. And the reason why people believe this, I guess they get caught up in it or whatever, is that they don't understand how deeply corrupt and controlling, the people behind the permanent government are. We're not discovering AI together. Okay, this has already been developed. Look at the Macy conferences, studying cybernetics and AI in like the 40s. Okay, these groups have already gone way beyond our infantile level of AI. They're decades ahead. This is a simulation that we're in the truest sense of the word, and that they're introducing this and creating a scenario so that we ultimately just accept, probably, I'm guessing, Elon. But don't for 1 second think that we're all discovering AI together. We're all in this together. We need to enter into the AI to solve it. This is just a pitch for, in a lot of ways, transhumanism, and it is a way of getting you to accept the culture of AI, the culture of the fallen Mars impulse I've been talking about for years, this hyper-technological, distorted, and quite frankly, satanic, modern, this is what modern Satanism looks like. It doesn't look like it did in the Middle Ages. This is the other thing too, is I always hear the argument that like the AI and technology is neutral. AI and technology is not neutral. It's not a neutral vehicle. Okay, the way that people, first of all, there's nothing really truly neutral. Everything is always in the direct image of who's creating it and their intentions for it. So it's not neutral, right? You all know Harari himself, okay, Mr. Transhumanist, will talk about AI, which apparently is neutral, with a picture of Christ behind him saying that the AI is going to rewrite the Bible. Okay, the people who are developing this, they don't think AI is neutral. They literally worship it. You cannot say that AI is neutral, that technology is neutral, and then have the people that are developing it literally think that it's a god, literally think that they're creating a form in which a god is going to incarnate into. It's going to write holy books. That's not neutral. This is a religion for them. They believe that they're going to create this AI and they're going to incarnate an entity into it. And then they're probably going to hook up the Antichrist into it or something. It's probably a cyborg. So technology and AI is not neutral. Nothing's neutral, especially not if the people who are developing it use technology as a religion, as a huge part of the religion. It's not neutral. They're just rolling out their sacraments. They're just rolling out their weird religion onto you and telling you it's neutral. And because people don't understand how the occult works and how esoterica works, we're like, oh yeah, it's just totally neutral. It's just fine. No. If it were totally neutral, they wouldn't be wanting to get it to rewrite the Bible. If it were totally neutral, they wouldn't be using it the way they're using it. It's a spiritual, ceremonial thing. Technology and AI is being ceremonially developed, and it is a spiritual thing for the people that are developing it, which is exactly why the mark of the beast was mentioned. Okay? It's exactly why we're facing this bizarre, weird technological age and being made to feel like we can't do anything about it. That's how this works. It's a sickness. Don't fall for it. The way through is through genuine spiritual development and through Christ within your heart. That is how we get through. You are going to be sold a very dark, weird bill of goods. Discern it. Do I think Elon Musk is the Antichrist? I think you can make a good case. I think that's why everybody talks about it. I think the risk is that people are going to get caught up in the Mars culture, which is really, again, it's an expression of the Nazi esoteric tradition. The idea, it was Werner von Braun, that his whole thing was like, we need to colonize space to live forever in the material plane. There is no concept within the transhumanist religion of resurrection and that you don't live in the physical plane forever. The earth doesn't live in the physical plane forever. It's ridiculous to think that. You spiritualize out of matter through transubstantiation, or what is called the resurrection mysteries. That's how you evolve out of samsara, out of matter. You have to transubstantiate yourself life after life and spiritualize yourself with the planet. So this idea that you're going to go colonize planets and live forever in the material plane is quite literally a kind of Satanism. It directly goes against you ascending. It is forever existing in the material plane. That goes against your own development. And to do that, you have to merge with machines anyway. And so we're being told that we need all these things for our survival. We need AI. We can't do anything about it. Yeah, we can. We can just not participate, which you'll be way better off anyway, no matter what it costs you. Because this world that we live in, this material world, this is not the prize. Yes, food is good. Relationships are good. It is beautiful here. There's beauty here, but this is not all there is. Don't live like it is. You are a spiritual being and you are destined to move beyond eventually this plane. So don't be told that you're anything else, and don't stand for it. If anyone ever does, question them, because that is an Antichrist ideology. I'm sorry, but it is. The Antichrist isn't just about the mark of the beast. It's also about the idea of colonizing space, living forever in this material world. That is also Antichrist nature. That's where the mark of the beast leads. It leads you to never be able to transcend matter and be trapped in it. So I'm not going to go too much further into it, because this is something that I'm obviously very passionate about, is identifying this very toxic pattern that we're going to come into more and more and more. Okay. So I think a lot of it's going to come through, actually, strangely enough, the political right, if we're not careful too, because the political right is not nearly skeptical enough of the hyper-technological stuff as it should be. So maybe I'm wrong there. Maybe I'm misseeing it. Maybe the left is also. All I know is that we need to start understanding the occult forces behind humanity and behind what we're creating, including technology, because this naive, childish view that technology is neutral and AI is neutral is going to lead people down the garden path. It ain't neutral. Okay. All right. This is from Alice in Wonderland. A type of psychedelic DMT is from the Sonoran toad. You once mentioned Ahriman having toads around him. Do you think this is connected? Did I? It was probably one of my mystical visions, but the weird thing is I actually have seen toads. I used to have these visions when I would try to understand what Ahriman was. I was very fascinated, and I wanted to have my own experiences with the information that I was reading and in my study. And so I remember actually seeing Ahriman in the earth, in the center of the earth, because as a kind of fallen angel archon, they're cast down into the earth. And so I saw this representation of Ahriman in kind of like in a cave in the earth, and around him were all these toads and frogs. And I since actually learned that the toad or the frog is also a chaos god in the Egyptian pantheon, and I did not actually know that. And so I think that it's sort of like, that was the criticism of like Pepe and Kek, was that the Q movement and sort of the that part of the right that was always using Pepe and Kek was that they were worshiping this Egyptian chaos god, because it's kind of like an anthropomorphized frog or toad, and that actually is the literal god of chaos in the Egyptian tradition. And so it could actually also have been archetypally that as well. I think it's really, I don't know if that was on purpose, if somebody was a chaos magician and was like, hey, let's spread this chaos god, or if it was just literally bubbling forward from people's consciousness because we are in a time of chaos. I don't know, but I found that to be really interesting. Okay, this one is from a member, and you asked, do you see any connection between the doppelganger, which is an anomalous case of the lesser guardian, and the harmonic subconscious body intelligence that enters before birth? I have seen Steiner translations that call them both a double. What happens to the doppelganger after we separate? Thinking, feeling, and willing. And does the body intelligence survive the sun dragon we meet at the third door of the sun? Okay, lots of good questions and lots of very deeply anthroposophical questions here. Okay, so essentially there is this idea in esoterica of something called the doppelganger. And most people think of the doppelganger as like a twin. And that's one way it's understood. But in spiritual science, it goes deeper. And we actually have a doppelganger or a twin that's sort of a dark aspect. And that dark aspect is actually connected to us. It's part of us. It's the deeper teaching behind, those cartoons when they have the devil on the shoulder and then the angel on the shoulder. That's true. You actually have a higher angel that works with you, guardian angel, all the time, never leaves your side. It's begging you to have a relationship with it to solve this world together, and then there's also a dark being. Now, in anthroposophy, we call this an harmonic being. So it's kind of has an harmonic essence. All right. And we have that with us our whole life. And it's actually connected to the electrical system of the body. It functions within the electrical system of the body. And it on a higher level, it serves us to be able to face our shadows and be able to confront the lessons of the age, which for us right now is materialism and everything that Ahriman represents in his energy. And Rudolf Steiner goes very deeply into what Ahriman represents. And I have a lecture on that as well on my channel if you want to check that out, like what is that exactly? And so it is subconscious, but people have seen it. And a lot of people will kind of see it as a kind of guardian at the threshold experience. It looks very similar to the guardian. It usually looks like a dark robed entity. And I understand that there's kind of like a different doppelganger depending on the level of development humanity was in. So I personally see that in earlier periods, the doppelganger was actually a reptilian form. It was actually a lizard human, which represented the Luciferian impulse more, the serpent impulse more. But then now that we're in the post-Atlantean age, I believe that people see it more like a cloaked figure. It's very spooky. And so, yes, it's like a lesser guardian. I think that like most people probably would not be able to discern the difference. I would say they're both, I think, of the same ultimate essence. And the last part of your question is what happens to the doppelganger after we separate thinking, feeling, and willing. So the thinking, feeling, and willing, we didn't actually have the ability to sort of think and feel and will until essentially around Atlantis. And we haven't always had that ability. And when we master that ability, like when we master our will, when we can control our mind, and when our emotions aren't controlling us, that's what that essentially means. It's a level of mastery. We move beyond our current level of development into basically an angelic development. And at that point, Ahriman, as we know it, will have been faced and vanquished. That's my understanding, or at least a great part of it will be. And that's my understanding of it, or at least he won't exist in the same way he exists now. So that's how I understand that. And does the bodily intelligence survive? In the sun dragon, we meet at the third door of the sun. Yeah, so the sun is fascinating. And we really learn so much about the soul and our development when we understand like birth and death and spiritual initiation, the cosmos. We just learn so much about the planets and the sun in a different way. Like we look at the sun and planets in our time and we're like, oh, that's a physical body. Like Venus is a hellscape, it's too hot to live, and Mars is this and that. But we actually have to see them as different spiritual developmental phases first. And then you can get into the physical stuff, because when you get into the sun, there's actually different gates of the sun that represent sort of confronting different aspects of yourself. But when you move through the sun, it's sort of, and you really go through the sun, and you're not just going through reincarnation, then you're going to take a different bodily form. But if you're reincarnating, there's a different magnetism to it, and you get pulled back into incarnation through the outer spheres and into a body again. Okay. Okay, what are we looking at? 2 hours and okay, well, let's do one more, two more. Okay, we'll do two more, because I am just having way too much fun with you guys tonight. I hope you've been having a good time with me. I really appreciate all of you guys being here with me. I love to answer your questions and do this. So if you like this, I do this pretty much twice a month on my, not pretty much, I do it twice a month on my private website. And I go for like sometimes 4 hours actually. So we cover so much material, and we're able to get very deeply into concepts that a lot of the time I really just can't cover on YouTube. And more YouTube is strangely becoming more strict. And so if you really want that inside track, if you want this more often or longer sessions, do sign up. That also helps me keep these videos out here for free. It allows me to continue doing the work that I do. So do consider being a premium member, or even making a donation. That helps me out so much. Okay, so that's the spiel. Let's get into two more questions, and then we're going to get into some shout outs. Okay. Okay, this one is from Blue Sage. Let me just write it. Okay, this one is from Blue Sage. Are the archangels of male energy, or are there any of female energy, or are they androgynous beings? Why are they? Okay. I'm just communicating with Wolf for a second. Okay. All right. So yeah, the angels and archangels are typically portrayed as male, and male energy. It's actually, there are images of angels that are portrayed as female in the Eastern tradition. I think that they're called Tenu or Tenin, and they're actually portrayed as female. The angelic beings, it's funny because if you really look at some of the earlier pictures of the archangels, they'll often have some feminine qualities. Like sometimes they'll actually have what look like breasts, or they'll have, long hair, and they look more feminine. So they kind of look like effeminate men. But like, obviously they're clearly men. They have, more muscles. Like if you look at Michael depictions and stuff, but they have an effeminate nature. And that is to symbolize that as humanity develops, we actually create a union with our polarities. So as we evolve, we create union within ourselves, and we begin to unify our male and female essences, which has always been symbolic of the divine androgen. So humanity was androgynous to begin with, which means that the soul had a male and female polarity. But as we moved deeper and deeper into matter and materialized, the pressure is so great that it naturally splits, almost like mitosis. And so if you're female, the masculine aspect of your soul is in the positively charged etheric body, and it's working upon you in your life. And then if you're male, your feminine aspect of your soul is also working with you and still attached to you and surrounding you, but its essence is sort of held in your etheric body, which is negatively charged. And so when you look at the occult science behind the human form, there definitely are distinct polarities. You can't just change genders or you can't make one, if you're already a female, you can't make yourself suddenly a male, and vice versa, because your actual physicality and your etheric body are charged in one way. And this is the deep mystery of sex. And so you're actually a polarity. You're the embodiment. If you're a woman, you're an embodiment of the negative polarity. And that goes way beyond your physicality to the entire makeup of your soul. Okay. And so as we move forward, we create union with ourself, and we eventually we'll return, obviously, like in billions of years or whatever, to more of an androgynous form that we started from. That is the mystery of sex and gender, which is an actual aspect of Hermeticism, which is part of who we are, which is being confused in society on purpose, because you need the synthesis of your two polarities in order to connect with spirit properly. So if you're confused about your polarity, you're not going to be able to create that spiritual reaction, that spiritual reaction between positive and negative. If you think that you're mixed up, you're not going to be able. So anyway, I know that's a very controversial thing to say. I know that's a controversial statement. But in order to understand the divine androgen, you have to know that the divine androgen doesn't exist physically. The divine androgen, which is the perfect harmonization of your male and female aspect, is a spiritual being. It's beyond physical incarnation. It's not done in physicality. It's done when we're incarnated. It's done inwardly through balancing out your divine feminine and your divine masculine elements, through understanding them and their place in your life. So you do it internally, and then as you evolve, eventually spiritually, we lose total physicality and we come back together into a kind of divine androgen again, because the ascension arc is a complete mirror of the descension arc. Okay, so sometimes angels and archangels are portrayed, and they are examples of that, which is why you'll see certain clearly male angels, but they'll have a very beautiful form, like very feminine and a little bit feminine, and they're portraying that secret, that mystical secret of the androgen, and our return to that. And I think a lot of people desire to return to that, but they don't understand what it is or how to get there. That it's an internal process that eventually, over a very long period of time, will come to pass, but not now. The other thing too is that the female form is the form of the descension and of matter, and of falling into matter, and of the earth. And as you ascend out, it's the male form that is the form that ascends. So in your female life or your female lives, these are the lives of the earth, and they're the life of the lower planes, not evil, but it's sort of like it's the part of you that is mutter, feminine. And you essentially, the way I understand it is that when you ascend out of matter, you do so in the positive polarity male form. So even when it comes to the different kinds of incarnations you have, the form matters. Some things are possible in a female form, some things are possible in a male form. So this is why when Christ ascends, he's male. Certain things are possible spiritually in a male form, and other things in a female form when it comes to very intense ceremonial practices. Now, for general development, These kinds of things don't really matter because we're all here, developing our eye. We're all here to heal. We're all here to grow. And in that sense, these very exalted spiritual questions about ascension and angels, I mean, these are all very advanced considerations. Like most people can live just fine not diving into this. And I say that because it's very difficult to talk about these kinds of things in today's in today's time, where it feels like there's a direct effort to confuse gender, to confuse sexuality. And so I feel like these things must be talked about, but I also feel like there needs to be like 10 million disclaimers on top of it, just so like I'm not a racist or something. It's become incredibly difficult to talk about these different topics because it feels like you're going through a minefield. But suffice to say, a feminine form in the negative polarity has a certain existence. It connects to the cosmos a certain way. Okay, and this has to do with matter and also to do with the materialization into matter. And the male form has to do with the ascension out of matter. Okay, this is one of the deepest, also a very deep secret in the mysteries. It doesn't mean that men are better than women or that women are better than men, because you have incarnated in both forms in many different lives. So we're not, just because you're in a male form or a female form, that doesn't, you have to understand that you've been both. And if you have a negative relationship with men or with women, it's probably not because of anything that any woman's done to you in your life, but really more to do with your own relationship with the feminine or your own relationship to the masculine. That's something we also have to understand, because that's how we create the union and we overcome polarity, is we have to understand how we are wounded in our understanding of the masculine and the feminine within ourselves. And we have to seek to heal that, right? And so these are very deep spiritual question. Angels have been portrayed in different ways, but typically they are portrayed as male for that reason. But they're not always portrayed that way. There have been times where in earlier periods and that has to do with consciousness at the time, where sometimes they were portrayed as female, but that again has to do with where humanity's conscious was. And moving on in different planetary developments, you kind of see different spiritual forces differently depending on where you are, right? Okay, guys, this is the last question. You really had some amazing ones for me today. Okay, this is from Megan Alejandra. How did you decide when it was the appropriate time for you to go public with your teachings, and what was that process like for you? Okay. So I feel like I was sort of brought into it in a way, because when I first started to appear on YouTube, it was like in 2008 or 2009, and no one was really talking about spirituality on YouTube. Like, no one really used it. It was not the massive platform that it is today. I mean, you couldn't even monetize, like there was no monetization. I remember that you used to be able to like private message people still on your YouTube account. And it was kind of an innocent time. And when I first started my channel, I had a different name channel originally. When I first started it, I did not want to be on camera. I wanted to make like videos. I wanted to make like these videos that basically had like a picture. Like, I don't know if you remember like those really weird, creepy videos that would have like someone talking in like photos. Like, that's actually what I wanted to do, like 15 years ago or whatever, or however long ago it was. I was like, yeah, that's what I'm going to do. Because I didn't really want to be on camera. I had a different job, a different life, different career. But I just felt very passionate about spirituality because I'd had some very weird experiences. And The internet also wasn't a place where you could get the kind of information that you can now. There weren't all these libraries and archives you could sign up for. There were just some really weird websites that had like a unicorn going across the screen, and like, the mouse that would be like a cloud or something. I mean, there's really strange information online. Like, did you guys remember the websites where you'd go on the website and then like music would play and stuff? Like, this is the era that I started in. Very different era than today. But what drove me to go online and actually be on camera and talk was actually an incredible feeling of loneliness, because I was having all these spiritual experiences and I couldn't find any books about what they were. Like I said, like the internet was not a resource as it is now. And the reason why I was online was because I just had this feeling like, if I'm struggling with this, then there must be a need for it. And if I have identified this need, maybe I can be that in this world. Maybe I can be that for someone else, so other people don't have to suffer with these weird spiritual experiences I couldn't explain. And so I started then, and it was just me basically sharing my experiences and kind of distilling them into the lesson that I thought they were. And I had absolutely like no understanding of what YouTube would become. I did not think it was possible to like work as an intuitive, because how does someone even do that? Again, it was like the late 2000s. And I obviously there were no YouTubers, like there was no career in YouTube. That didn't start until around 2012, and for mystics around 2015. I didn't even monetize my channel until 2015 or so. So literally it was just something I was doing out of just love. Like I just felt like I had to. And then eventually people wanted me to try and do readings for them. And I had no idea. I just did them for free, and eventually, or by donation. And I'd say, listen, I'm just going to tell you what I see, and you can just pay what you think you can. And I did that for a few years, actually. That was really hard because, it just is. And then eventually I was able to transfer into having a private practice. It went well enough that, I could have a practice. And then YouTube started to pick up, and you could have at least somewhat of a thing going on YouTube. And I never really advertised or really did much of that, but just showed up, I think. And then I just became very booked, and I would open up my calendar, and then it would be, be booked a month in advance. Like I'd open the calendar up, and then it would be booked in like 24 hours. I worked with so many incredible people. Maybe some of you are watching. I loved it. I loved having a private practice. I loved working with people. I loved connecting with them. I adored it. And eventually it became too intense. I couldn't just do all of my private clients and then also make YouTube videos and edit them and do both. And so I had to choose. And so around 2015, 2016, I chose to just teach. And I let go of my private practice. And so that was the last time I took clients. And so I haven't done that in that sense. I do still do readings, friends of friends, certain occasions, certain contacts, but it's not the way that I used to. And so that's how I started. And that's how I really recommend other mystics to get started, is you start by putting yourself out there. A good way to start is to do it by donation. And that frees you and it frees the person. It allows you to get the practice sense of how you operate. It takes a long time as a working psychic to learn your own inner language, learn how to read the different kinds of people that exist, learn how to deal with clients. And so once you feel like you have that down and you are booking and you are getting referrals and it's taking off, then you can set a price. You can set a fair price for your time that makes sense for you. That's up to you. And then you just go from there. And that's essentially how I did it. I never really meant to go public with anything because, to be quite honest with you, back then, the TikTok didn't exist, Instagram didn't exist. It was just Facebook and YouTube. And you couldn't really make any career out of that. It was just like basically a social platform. So I think nowadays, I think nowadays it's very different, and we're seeing people totally, I think, just operating really differently, especially in the spiritual side of things. But I would say in this day and age, how you would know it's appropriate to go public with your teachings is just to start sharing. You know, I think that if you have something in your life, a lesson, that's a gift for humanity. And if you've overcome something and you understand it, then you can share that with others and that can help them as well. And I think that's beautiful. I think having a social media account, whether it be TikTok or Instagram or on Twitter, where you just share things that are important to you, things that you've overcome, and you share the spiritual wisdom that you have, I think that's a beautiful thing. But I think that you have to share it without any expectation of becoming something. Don't expect to become famous, or don't expect to be like a millionaire. If you want to come into this work, you have to do this because you absolutely love it. And you can't imagine doing anything different, and your heart absolutely aches to be in service. This work, spiritual teaching and being in service in a spiritual sense, is a work and life of service, which means that much higher forces than yourself work through you on behalf of humanity and to uplift. And so it takes sacrifice in your life, maybe even everything that you have, to be able to make that kind of strong connection with spirit. It's not something that you take on like an accessory, that you just do and everything stays the same. You'll have to go through trials. You'll have to go through periods where you have to choose it, even though you're hurting, even though you're suffering. You have to choose this. And that's the more challenging side of this that maybe people don't talk about. But at the end of the day, it has to be your love of God and your love of humanity that pulls you through every single time to show up and to serve people that you may not even know, but to love them like you do, and to see the beauty in humanity, the potential in humanity, and to love humanity. That's what it takes. And if you have that within you, then you are called, and you should do this. But if there's any part of you that wants to use this field, that wants to use your psychic abilities or use spirituality to just get famous, to just make money, walk away. Because that'll be one of the biggest mistakes that you make in your soul's existence. Because this work takes something else, something greater. And you can't come at it with selfishness. And I'm not saying anybody is or anything like that. I'm just warning, because there is such a laissez-faire attitude towards spiritual work and towards spiritual topics. So it's making it too mundane. When if you want to work in this field, and I know people are watching that are shaking their heads like, yes, this is a calling. And if it is in you, and if you have that love in you, and you have that sense of service, then you will find yourself being miraculously guided into positions where you can serve. You will find yourself blessed. You will find yourself here. You will find yourself in the most incredible situations in your life. But it's a process. So thank you guys so much for being with me today. I'm going to do some shout outs, some super chats. Thank you guys so much for that. Thank you, Yep, Raven Creek Charms, Elizabeth and Asana, Jason Van Leuven, Catherine Massetti, Rolando, Vlad the Sanctions Impaler, Ashtree, and Cat Gray's Healing. Thank you guys so much for being with me tonight. I want to wish you guys all a very Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays. I will be back here on YouTube with some lectures in the new year. I'm currently writing them. And if you are a member, I will see you on, I think, New Year's Eve day. And we will have another session just like this. And I will cover whatever questions you guys want. As always, it's my absolute pleasure to connect with you. All my love your way. And I'll see you next time. Happy holidays.